She didn't scream. That's the part nobody talks about. When Marcus Thorne wrapped his hand around Sloane's throat in the middle of Highland Plaza Concourse, right there between the pretzel cart and the fountain where children throw coins and wish for good things, she didn't scream. She went still. The way prey goes still. The way a woman goes still when her body has been trained, over 4 years of marriage, to understand that noise makes it worse. Maya was 7 feet away, holding a pink lemonade, watching her mother's feet lift slightly off the polished marble floor. 7 years old. Pink lemonade. Marble floor. That image will not leave you. I know it won't. Because it hasn't left me. Sloane had a protective order in her purse. 500 yards. Signed by a judge. Stamped and certified and completely, utterly useless against a man who had decided that paper was not the same thing as fear. And Marcus Thorne had never been afraid of paper. He leaned in close enough that she could smell the spearmint gum he always chewed when he was about to do something he'd apologize for later, and he whispered something against her ear that made her close her eyes. That was the moment the man in the charcoal suit looked up from across the concourse. He hadn't been watching her. He'd been watching everything. There is a particular kind of stillness that dangerous men carry. Not the stillness of peace, but the stillness of something that has already calculated the outcome and found it acceptable. Vincenzo Vane had that stillness. He wore it the way other men wear cologne. Quietly. Permanently. And in a way that made the air around him feel different. He set down his coffee. He straightened his cuff. And he walked toward Marcus Thorne with the calm of a man who had never once, in his entire life, been in a hurry to do damage, because he had never once needed to be. What happened next took 11 seconds. 11 seconds to dismantle a man who had spent 4 years making one woman feel like she had no options. 11 seconds that would cost Sloane something she didn't yet know she was about to owe. Because men like Vincenzo Vane do not intervene for free. They never do. And the question this story is going to ask you, the question that will keep you watching until the very last frame, is not whether Vane saved Sloane. He did. The question is, from what? And at what price? Stay with me. Sloane Adeyemi had a system. Not a life. A system. She woke at 5:14 every morning. Not because her alarm was set for that time, but because her body had learned that the 6 minutes before 5:20 were the safest minutes of the day. Quiet. Dark. Hers. Before Maya needed breakfast. Before the medical billing software at Crestview Health Partners loaded its daily queue of rejected claims. Before the world remembered she existed and started demanding pieces of her she hadn't budgeted for. She checked the door first. Always the door. Deadbolt, chain lock, the rubber wedge jammed beneath the handle every night. Not because the building was unsafe, but because safety was something Sloane had stopped trusting other people to provide. The apartment was small. Deliberately small. Small meant one entrance. Small meant she could see every corner from the hallway. Small meant that when she woke at 5:14 with her heart already accelerating for no reason she could name, she could stand in the center of the living room and confirm, visually, completely, that nothing was wrong. Maya's door was closed. Crayon drawing of a purple horse taped to the outside. Sloane touched it every morning. Not sentimentally. Like a checkpoint. She's here. She's safe. Keep moving. Kendra Osei called at 7:42, already on her third coffee, with opinions she needed to distribute before 8 a.m. You're taking Maya to the mall today. Not a question. She needs shoes. Sloane tucked the phone between her ear and shoulder, pouring oatmeal without measuring. She'd stopped measuring things. Measuring implied room to be wrong. The ones she has are 2 sizes too small. Put it off longer. Kendra. I work at the transit office. I see camera feeds from 6 districts. Her voice dropped. I saw a black Dodge Charger on the Highland Plaza feed yesterday. Idling. 45 minutes. Registered to Darnell Thorne. A pause that landed like a stone. That's Marcus's brother. Sloane's hand stopped stirring. He doesn't know I shop there. He knows everything about you. He always has. That was the problem. Maya appeared in the doorway, purple pajamas, hair everywhere, dragging her stuffed elephant boots by one ear. She looked at her mother with the specific radar children of tense households develop early. The ability to read a room before they're fully awake. Are we still going? Maya asked. Sloane looked at her daughter's feet. The left sneaker had a hole near the big toe. 3 weeks. She'd been looking at that hole for 3 weeks. Yes, Sloane said. We're still going. She parked on level 2, backed into the space, always backed in, and sat for 90 seconds before unbuckling. Watching the mirrors. Watching the elevator. Watching the man near the stairwell who turned out to be a teenager eating chips. Maya held her hand through the garage. Through the sliding doors. Through the main concourse where the fountain threw coins of light across marble floors and a jazz quartet played something warm near the food court. Sloane's eyes moved constantly. Not frantically. She'd trained herself out of frantic years ago because frantic draws attention. She moved her eyes the way a former soldier moves through a crowd. Methodically. Cataloging exits, blind spots, faces that appeared twice. She found the shoe store. Maya chose white sneakers with silver trim, $12 more than budgeted. Sloane bought them anyway. It was walking back through the concourse, Maya holding the bag, Sloane checking her phone, that she felt it. Not a sound. A change in the air. She had learned, over 4 years of marriage, to feel Marcus Thorne before she saw him. Some atmospheric shift. Some animal warning the body never forgets no matter how much therapy tries to talk it into standing down. She looked up. He was 20 feet away. Gray Henley, sleeves pushed to the elbows. Smiling the warm smile he reserved for audiences, the one that made strangers think what a nice man and made her feel insane for knowing otherwise. Sloane. He said her name like it was a favor. Maya's hand tightened in hers. That was the only thing that mattered. That small hand. You're violating the order, Sloane said. Steadier than she felt. I'm shopping. He spread his hands. Public place. Maya, walk to that bench. She's fine where she is. His voice shifted. The smile stayed but the warmth beneath it died, the way a light stays on after the power source has been cut. 2 minutes. That's all. She reached for her phone. He closed the distance in 3 steps, faster than she'd clocked, faster than her preparation had accounted for, and his hand found her arm first, then adjusted, and then his hand was at her throat. Not squeezing. Not yet. Just there. A reminder. The jazz quartet kept playing. The fountain kept throwing light. And Maya made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a cry and was somehow worse than both. Sloane's feet left the marble floor. She did not scream. She went still. The way she always went still. The way her body had been trained over 4 years to understand that noise makes it worse. And then, from her left, not rushing, moving with a slowness so deliberate it felt choreographed, a man in a charcoal suit appeared at Marcus Thorne's shoulder. He placed one hand on Marcus's wrist. One hand, almost gently. Applied a pressure so precise, so anatomically targeted, that Marcus's grip released before his brain finished deciding whether to resist. Marcus turned, furious, already forming words, and looked at the man in the charcoal suit, and stopped forming words. What he saw in Vincenzo Vane's face was not aggression, not anger. Something worse than anger. The particular indifference of a man for whom the outcome had already been calculated and found acceptable, and who required no further emotional investment in the proceedings. Step back, Vane said. 2 words. Volume of a conversation. Weight of a verdict. Marcus Thorne, who had never stepped back from anything in his adult life, stepped back. He did it before he understood he'd done it. Security arrived 4 minutes later. 4 minutes too late to matter, but just in time to make it official. Vane spoke to Detective Reyes. Compact, tired-eyed, 15 years of domestic calls written into the lines of his face. Briefly, privately, and handed him a business card. Sloane watched Reyes look at the card. She watched something shift in his face. Not fear. Recalibration. The expression of a man quietly rearranging the furniture of his assumptions. They cuffed Marcus near the fountain. He was screaming by the time they reached the door, screaming Sloane's name, screaming what he'd do when he got out, with the particular ferocity of a man who had mistaken volume for power for so long he no longer knew the difference. Maya sat on the bench where Sloane had pointed. She had not moved. She held the shoe bag in both hands and watched her mother with enormous dry eyes. Not crying. Sloane crossed to her daughter and crouched down and put both hands on Maya's face. "It's over," she said. She believed it when she said it. Vane was still at the fountain when Sloane straightened up. Standing with the ease of a man who found the center of public disturbances a perfectly natural place to be still. She walked toward him because walking away felt like the wrong kind of cowardice. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her, not through her, not past her, at her. The full, architectural attention of someone already identifying load-bearing walls. "Are you injured?" "No." He nodded. Glanced at Maya. Something moved across his face, quick and contained, then back to Sloane. "The order you have," he said. "It won't hold him. It's legally. It's paper. Flat. Factual. The way you tell someone a screen door doesn't stop rain. Thorne's family has resources. And patience. And a particular belief that consequences are for other people. How do you know about his family?" He reached into his jacket. Produced a card, cream, minimal, name and number in dark embossed ink, and held it out. V. Vane. Strategic Solutions. No address. No title. No explanation. "If the situation changes," he said, "use it." He turned to leave. "Why did you help me?" Sloane asked. He paused. When he turned back, his expression occupied the narrow, complicated space between warm and cold. "Because your daughter was watching," he said. Then he walked away through the crowd, and the crowd parted without knowing why, out of some instinct older than recognition, some animal understanding that this man occupied a different category than the people around him. Sloane stood at the fountain, card in hand, her daughter at her side. The ghost of Marcus Thorne's grip still present on her throat like a bruise that hadn't surfaced yet. She put the card in her pocket. She didn't call Kendra until they were back in the car. Doors locked. Engine running. Concrete walls of the garage around them like a bunker. "He was there," Sloane said. "I know." He put his hand on my throat. In front of Maya. "I know, baby. There was a man." He intervened. Before anyone. She stopped. Exhaled. He gave me his card. Vane. V. Vane. The silence on Kendra's end lasted long enough that Sloane checked if the call had dropped. "Don't call that number." Kendra's voice had changed. The pragmatic warmth was gone. What replaced it was something Sloane hadn't heard from Kendra before. Something that sounded, unmistakably, like fear. "Vincenzo Vane runs the East End docks. He's the fixer. He doesn't solve problems, Sloane. He acquires them. And then he owns them." Sloane looked at the card. Maya was asleep in the back seat, cheek against the window, new shoes still on her feet. "He helped me," Sloane said. "Yes," Kendra said. "He did. And that is exactly what worries me." The violation report was filed at 9:47 the following morning. Sloane sat in a hard plastic chair outside courtroom 4B and filled it out by hand because the electronic system was down, and the clerk, a woman whose name tag said Phyllis, had the specific energy of someone who had stopped apologizing for institutional failures around the same time she stopped believing they'd be fixed. Maya was at school. Sloane had walked her to the classroom door, spoken to Ms. Okafor, who had been told, quietly in September, that Maya's father was a concern, and stood outside the building for 3 minutes after the bell before making herself leave. She made herself leave. That was the thing nobody understood about her life. How much of it was making herself do ordinary things? making herself walk to the car, making herself drive without checking the rear view every 11 seconds, making herself sit in a government building and describe, calmly, clinically, the exact pressure of a man's hand around her throat, while a clerk typed it into a form that would become, at best, a slightly stronger piece of paper than the one she already had. Phyllis typed without looking up. Can you recall the specific language the defendant used upon restraint? Sloane recalled it perfectly. She had a memory like that. High definition for trauma, blurred for everything ordinary. She recited Marcus's words in the order he'd said them, hitting the same syllables he'd hit. Phyllis typed. Outside the window, a city bus groaned past. A pigeon landed on the ledge and looked at Sloane with a blank, untroubled expression of a creature that had never once been afraid of anything it loved. She envied it. The card stayed in her jacket pocket. She told herself that was practical. Government buildings ran cold, she needed the jacket. She did not examine the part of herself that wanted the card within reach. She had enough to examine already. Vane came to Crestview Health Partners on a Wednesday. Not Monday, too aggressive. Not end of day, too much like a trap. Wednesday, 2:15 p.m. The dead zone of the workday when morning momentum had died and the end-of-day push hadn't started. When people were most unguarded. Sloane noticed the timing later. Filed it under things that are not accidental with this man. She was running Medicare resubmissions when Terry from reception appeared at her cubicle with the expression of someone who had just encountered something outside their usual taxonomy. There's a man here for you. No appointment. Terry paused, recalling exact phrasing. He says he wants to return something you left at Highland Plaza. Sloane hadn't left anything at Highland Plaza. She knew who it was before she stood. He was in the waiting room reading a cholesterol pamphlet with what appeared to be genuine attention. Charcoal suit, different cut, same color, as though charcoal was less a preference than a philosophy. He looked precisely as out of place in the beige fluorescent waiting room as a panther would look in a parking garage. Present. Contained. Slightly wrong in a way that made the air feel different. He looked up when she entered. Ms. Adeyemi. You know my last name. I know several things. No apology. Somewhere private. She took him to the audit conference room. Closed the door. Stood on the opposite side of the table and crossed her arms and waited. He didn't sit. Neither did she. Thorne's bail hearing is Friday, he said. Her stomach dropped. How do you know that? Because I made it my business. He reached into his jacket and set a thin folder on the table. His family has retained Harlan Briggs. He's never lost a domestic case in this jurisdiction. Not because he's the best attorney in the city, because he's very good at making women look unstable. The word landed precisely. Unstable. The exact word Marcus had used at the mall. The exact word that had followed her through 2 previous hearings, 1 dismissed charge, 1 restraining order that took 4 months and a broken collarbone to obtain. She didn't touch the folder. What's in it? Thorne's financial structure. His brother's connection to a fraud investigation. And a signed statement from a witness at Highland Plaza who wasn't interviewed by police. He looked at her steadily. Things your attorney should have. I can't afford. I know what you can afford. No softening. Just information, delivered like a map to someone standing in the dark. I have a firm. The medical wing handles billing and legal liaison for 3 hospital networks. There's a position, medical records coordinator. 40% higher salary. Benefits include legal representation. Sloane stared at him. You're offering me a job. Yes. You came to my workplace to offer me a job. I came because Darnell Thorne drove past this building twice this morning. The information arrived the way all his information arrived. Clean, level, carrying the specific weight of something you couldn't unknow. And because I wanted you to have that folder before Friday. The room felt smaller. Sloane looked at the folder. Cream-colored. Unremarkable. Not looking like what it contained. Kendra says you're the fixer for the East End docks. Something moved across his face. Not surprise. The faint recalibration of a man encountering an accurate description and deciding how much to confirm. Kendra Osei, he said. Smart woman. She told me not to call you. Also smart. And yet here you are. Here I am. He straightened his cuff, that small deliberate gesture, like punctuation. Thorne's family operates on a specific principle. They make women tired on purpose. Missed court dates, intimidation, financial erosion. They starve the case until it dies. A pause. I don't like that principle. Why not? He picked up the folder and held it across the table. Take this to Friday's hearing, he said. That's all I'm asking right now. She looked at his hand. The folder. The clean squared lines of a man who moved through the world as though it had been organized to accommodate him. She took it. The exchange was clean. His hand didn't linger. What does the job actually cost? She heard herself ask. He turned at the door. The fluorescent light overhead did him no favors, and somehow he looked better in it anyway, which annoyed her for reasons she didn't examine. Nothing you haven't already paid, he said. And left. She called Kendra from the parking lot. He came to my job. I know. Terry called Denise, who called me. Kendra's voice was tight. Small city. He gave me a folder. Evidence for Friday. And offered me a job. The silence was the specific kind that means competing calculations happening at speed. What's in the folder? Sloane opened it against the steering wheel. What was in it was not nothing. A signed statement from a woman named Britta Solano, a boutique owner whose shop faced the concourse fountain directly, who had watched the entire incident from 40 feet away, who had not been approached by Detective Reyes or anyone on his team, and who had written in precise and devastating detail exactly what she had seen Marcus Thorne do. A property filing connecting Darnell Thorne to a warehouse flagged in a city fraud investigation. Not evidence of Marcus's specific crime, but evidence of a family pattern a skilled attorney could weaponize. A photograph. Sloane stared at it. Time-stamped 40 minutes before the incident. Darnell's black Dodge Charger. Level 2 of the Highland Plaza garage. Her level. With a clear shot of the plate. He had been there before her. They had been waiting. Kendra. Her voice was flat. He had someone in that garage before we arrived. I know. This was planned. I know, baby. The pretzel cart. The fountain. The jazz quartet. Maya's pink lemonade. All of it scaffolded around a trap she had walked into because her daughter needed shoes. She sat with that for exactly the amount of time she could afford. Then she put the folder in her bag with the intention of someone who has made a decision they won't be revisiting. Friday's bail hearing lasted 22 minutes. Harlan Briggs was everything Vane had described. Smooth, patrician, wielding the confidence of a man who had won this argument so many times he found it tedious. He painted Sloane as volatile. He used the word pattern 3 times. He made protective order sound like a personality flaw. Sloane sat beside her court-appointed attorney and felt the familiar undertow, the one that wanted to pull her under and leave her voiceless, managed, reduced to documents that described her only in terms of what had been done to her and never in terms of what she had survived. Then her attorney submitted Britta Solano's statement. Then the photograph. Then the property connection. Harlan Briggs stopped finding it tedious. The Honorable Judge Carla Obi, reading glasses on a beaded chain, the expression of a woman who had been deceived by polished men before and had organized her entire courtroom to ensure it didn't happen again, read Britta's statement twice. Bail denied. Marcus remanded. He looked at Sloane across the courtroom with a flatness worse than fury. Fury she knew how to read. This was something recalculating. Something patient. She looked away first. In the back row, a man in a charcoal suit sat with his hands folded. He didn't react when the ruling came. Just stood, buttoned his jacket, and left before the gallery cleared. Sloane sat in the emptying courtroom for 3 minutes. Then she pulled out the card and dialed. 1 ring. Ms. Adeyemi, Vane said. The job, she said. I'll take it. A single measured breath. Monday morning, he said. And hung up. She sat in the empty courtroom with the peculiar sensation of someone who has moved from one room to another in the dark, not knowing what the new room contains, knowing only that the old one was burning. Both things were possible. Both things were true. The Ironwood district sat on the northeast edge of the city like a sentence edited until only the essential words remained. No excess. No ornament. Just clean lines, security infrastructure dressed as architecture, and the particular silence of a neighborhood where nothing happened publicly because everything was handled privately. Sloane's new apartment was on the 14th floor of Halverson Tower. 2 bedrooms. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A kitchen with counter space she didn't know what to do with. A front door with a biometric lock, secondary deadbolt, and a reinforced steel frame that Marcus Thorne could throw himself against until he ran out of body and it still wouldn't move. She stood in the center of the living room on the first night and did what she always did. She counted the exits. 1 front door. 1 service exit at the end of the hall. Fire escape accessible only from the master bedroom window, locked from inside with a key she kept on her person. 3 exits. She had lived in apartments with 1. She sat on the floor, movers hadn't arrived, the space still empty and echoing, pulled Maya into her lap and they ate takeout noodles from paper containers. Maya said the apartment smelled like a hotel. Sloane said that was because it was clean. Maya thought about it and said she liked it. Sloane pressed her chin to the top of her daughter's head. I'm doing the right thing. The thought had the careful constructed quality of something being built in real time, brick by brick, because the foundation underneath it was still wet. The job was not what she'd expected. She had prepared for discomfort. For work that felt like obligation. For colleagues who treated her like a charity case. For the specific indignity of a position created for her rather than offered to her. None of that happened. Vane's strategic group occupied a glass building on Meridian Avenue that looked designed by someone who believed transparency was a form of power. The medical wing processed billing and compliance work for 3 hospital networks. The work was genuine. Her direct supervisor, a methodical man named Obina Tade who communicated exclusively through annotated spreadsheets and precisely timed calendar invites, treated her like a professional from the first morning. Nobody mentioned the mall. Nobody looked at her with that cocktail of pity and curiosity she'd become fluent in reading. She was simply a medical records coordinator who started on a Monday and knew what she was doing. By Wednesday she had restructured a billing queue backlogged for 6 weeks. Obina sent a calendar invite titled Good Work with no other content. She almost smiled. She saw Vane on Thursday. Not scheduled. Not summoned. She was crossing the second-floor atrium with a compliance file when he appeared from a corridor to her left, mid-conversation with 2 men whose job descriptions were deliberately vague. He registered her without breaking his conversation. A single glance. Acknowledgement without interruption. She kept walking. At the end of the corridor she noticed she'd been holding the file tighter than necessary. She made herself loosen her grip. She filed that, the tightening, the noticing, the deliberate loosening, under things to watch in yourself. Kendra came over Thursday evening under the stated pretense of helping organize Maya's room. The actual pretense was threat assessment. They sat at the kitchen table with tea while Maya narrated a chess game she was playing against herself in the living room. He came to your workplace, Kendra said. Gave you evidence that won your bail hearing. Moved you into a building he controls. Gave you a job at his firm. She wrapped both hands around her mug. You understand what I'm describing. He's been helpful. Sloane. I know what you're going to say. Let me say it anyway because I need to hear myself say it out loud. Kendra set down her mug. You've traded one man's control for another man's protection. The difference is real. What Marcus did was violence and what Vane is doing is not violence. But they share a grammar. A woman at the center. A man managing the perimeter. And she never quite controls the terms. From the living room, Maya said, to no one, To the chess pieces, check. He hasn't asked me for anything, Sloane said. Yet. Silence. I'm watching, Sloane said. I'm not blind, not confused, not in love. I'm watching. Kendra studied her friend the way she always did, reading the things she wasn't saying. Okay, she said. Which meant I hear you and I'm still worried and I'll be here regardless, all compressed into 2 letters. The chess game happened on a Saturday. Sloane had not planned it. Had not engineered it. Vane had come to Halverson Tower to speak with the building's security director. A rotation adjustment, nothing involving her. He arrived at 10, concluded by 10:20, was crossing the lobby toward the exit when Maya appeared from the elevator with a chessboard under her arm and the focused expression of a child on a mission. She stopped when she saw him. He stopped when she saw her. Maya assessed him with the frank, unfiltered attention that 7-year-olds apply to adults before social training teaches them to be diplomatic. Do you play? She nodded at the board. Something moved across Vane's face. Quick. Contained. I do, he said. You can be black. Maya was already heading toward the corner table near the window, apparently considering the matter settled. Sloane stepped out of the elevator 30 seconds later. She saw them. Her daughter arranging pieces with great ceremony. Vincenzo Vane, who ran the East End docks and made Detective Reyes recalibrate with a business card, sitting across a chessboard from a 7-year-old who had named her Elephant Boots. He looked up and met Sloane's eyes. She saw something she hadn't seen before. Not the calm. Not the calculation. Something quieter than both. The expression of a man encountering something he hadn't budgeted for and finding, against his own architecture, that he didn't want to leave it. She sat in the 3rd chair. Off to the side. Present but separate. She watched. He played well. Better than well. With the same patience he brought to everything, building structures several moves ahead, creating inevitabilities rather than reacting to threats. But he didn't play to win. Sloane saw it within 6 moves. He was playing to educate, creating situations where Maya's instincts would be tested, where she'd make a mistake and have space to understand why before it was punished. Maya lost the first game and demanded an immediate rematch with the confidence of someone who considered the first game research. Vane reset the board without comment. You let her find the fork herself, Sloane said quietly between games. Instead of showing her. He glanced at her. She'll remember it longer. Most people would just show her. Most people are more interested in being seen teaching than in actual learning occurring. Maya moved a knight with great ceremony. Vane looked at the board. That's a good move, he said. Maya beamed with the totality only children beam with, the kind of joy that hasn't yet learned to protect itself. Sloane felt something shift in her chest. Not dramatic. Not seismic. Something smaller and therefore more dangerous. A quiet rearranging, the way furniture looks different in morning light than you expected. She looked away from him. Outside the lobby windows the city ran its Saturday routines. Ordinary. Unhurried. Unaware that anything was changing inside this building. She sat between the life she'd survived and whatever this was becoming, and she did not allow herself to name it. Not yet. The pendant arrived on a Tuesday. Not delivered. Not sent. Placed on her desk when she returned from lunch, in a small matte box with no card. She opened it. Dark metal. A family crest. Clean lines. The design of something that had meant something to someone long before it meant anything to her. She had seen it once before, briefly, a small pin on his lapel the day of the chess game. She sat with the open box for a long time. Obinna walked past. Glanced at it. Kept walking, but his pace had changed fractionally. As though the pendant were information he had filed. She closed the box. Put it in her desk drawer. Thought about it for the rest of the afternoon, which she had known she would. That evening she called Kendra. He left something on my desk. A pendant. His family crest. Kendra was quiet longer than usual. That's not jewelry, she said. In his world that's a declaration. That you're under his designation. That anyone in his network, and Sloane, his network touches things you haven't seen yet. Anyone who sees that on you knows you are not to be touched. He didn't ask me to wear it. He wouldn't. Men like him don't ask. They offer. They let you choose. Either way, the choosing tells them something. What does not wearing it tell him? That you're still deciding. A pause. What does wearing it tell you? Sloane didn't answer. Not because she had no answer. Because the answer had a shape she wasn't ready to hold. The call came at 2:09 a.m. Not Vane. Not Kendra. Detective Reyes. Marcus Thorne was sentenced this morning, he said, without preamble. 10 years. Blackwood Penitentiary. Transfer completed this afternoon. Sloane sat up in the dark. You're calling me at 2 in the morning to tell me good news? The pause that followed lasted exactly 1 beat too long. We found Darnell Thorne outside Halverson Tower an hour ago. Him and 2 others. Reyes's voice carried the careful flatness of someone delivering information they don't fully control. They were removed from the premises before we arrived. Quietly. No injuries reported. Removed. By who? Reyes didn't answer that. He didn't need to. Ms. Adeyemi. Something almost personal entered his voice. The card Vane gave me at Highland Plaza. I ran it. Made calls. A breath that carried the weight of what he'd found. Some perimeters protect you. Some just change who owns the lock. You understand what I'm saying? She understood. He hung up. Sloane sat in the dark of her 14th floor apartment with Reyes's words settling over her like weather that had been building for weeks and had finally decided to arrive. Some just change who owns the lock. She got up. Crossed to Maya's door. Touched the crayon horse. Still here. Still safe. She stood in the hallway a long time. Then she walked to her desk and opened the drawer and looked at the map box without opening it. The city hummed 14 floors below. Indifferent. Continuous. Unknowing. She closed the drawer and went back to bed and lay in the dark with her eyes open until 5:14, when the alarm didn't go off because her body had already been awake for 3 hours doing what it always did. Waiting for the thing that was coming. She confronted Vane the next morning. Not in his office. Too much his territory. Not in the conference room. Too enclosed. In the second-floor atrium, mid-crossing, where there were witnesses and open space and no furniture arranged to give him the advantage. She had thought about the geometry of it. She was learning to think like him. She hadn't decided yet whether that was useful or a warning sign. Darnell Thorne, she said. He stopped. Looked at her. Waited. You had people outside my building. Yes. The directness of it knocked her off her prepared footing. She had expected deflection. Managed ambiguity. The smooth repositioning of a man who dealt in half-truths professionally. You didn't tell me. No. I need to know when. If I'd told you, he said, you would have spent the night afraid. Instead you slept. He held her gaze without flinching. I made a calculation. That is not your calculation to make. Something shifted in his expression. The first time she had ever watched him genuinely recalibrate in real time. Not after the fact, not privately, but visibly, in front of her, in the middle of his own atrium. You're right, he said. 2 words. Clean. No qualification attached. She had loaded herself for resistance. His agreement was somehow harder to stand inside than an argument would have been. Everything that concerns me or Maya, she said. I need to know. Not a summary. Not a filtered version. Everything. Agreed. I'm not a case file. I know what you are. His voice dropped a register. Not soft, something more precise than soft. Something that carried the specific weight of a statement that had been true for longer than he'd been saying it out loud. That's why I'm still here. The atrium moved around them. Ordinary business. Controlled information. The architecture of a man's professional life continuing on all sides while they stood at the center of it having a conversation that had nothing to do with any of it. Sloane looked at him. Really looked, the way she had been carefully not doing, and found what she'd been afraid of finding. A man who was not Marcus Thorne. Not the opposite of Marcus Thorne. Not a clean hero in a charcoal suit with simple motivations she could catalogue and file. Something more complicated than either. A man with genuine capacity for damage who had chosen, for reasons she still didn't fully own, to point that capacity in a different direction. She thought about what that choice cost him. She thought about what accepting it was costing her. Dinner, she said. Tonight. My apartment. Maya will be there. You tell me everything, what you know, what you're watching, what the actual risk is. She paused. All of it. He looked at her for a moment. I'll bring food, he said. He brought Lebanese. Containers that suggested he knew exactly where to order from, which meant he had been paying attention to small details about her, or had sent someone to pay attention, and she had decided those two things were different enough to matter but hadn't resolved which one she was hoping for. Maya talked for 40 minutes without stopping. A book she was reading. A disagreement with a girl at school named Portia that had complex geopolitical dimensions involving the ownership of a shared pencil case. A theory about why Boots the elephant preferred the left side of the bed, and whether elephants in the wild had similar preferences. Vane listened to all of it. Not with the stretched patience of an adult enduring a child. With actual attention, asking one precise question that made Maya stop mid-sentence, think genuinely, then continue with a revised and more accurate theory. Maya looked at him afterward with the expression of someone who had been taken seriously and wasn't entirely sure how to metabolize it. After Maya was in bed, Sloane and Vane sat at the kitchen table and he told her. All of it. The Thorne families reach into 3 city districts. The 2 outstanding intimidation complaints against Darnell that had been quietly buried by a councilman whose campaign the family had funded. The intercepted message, sent to someone inside Crestview Health Partners, Sloane's old workplace, asking for her new address. Someone she had worked beside for 4 years had been asked to find her. She sat with that. The fluorescent hum of the kitchen. The distant sound of the city. Maya breathing somewhere down the hall, safe and unknowing. Did they get it? She asked. No. How certain? Completely. She looked at her hands flat on the table. At the grain of the wood. At the ordinary domestic geometry of a kitchen where her daughter had eaten dinner and laughed about her elephant, and gone to bed without looking over her shoulder. The pendant, she said. He didn't react. Kendra told me what it means. In your world. In my world, he said carefully. It means exactly what I mean it to mean. Not ownership. Designation. The difference matters. Does it? Yes. Steady. Ownership means you don't get to leave. Designation means no one gets to touch you. I told you I'd be honest. That's the honest answer. And if I leave? Take Maya. Take the job somewhere else, rebuild somewhere out of reach. Then I help you do that. No hesitation. And the designation goes with you whether you wear the pendant or not. Because I've already made it. She stared at him. You've already told people. Yes. Without asking me. Yes. He held her gaze the way he held everything. Completely without apology, without the performance of remorse that isn't remorse. I made the decision when I watched him lift you off that floor and your daughter stood 7 feet away holding a cup with both hands because she had learned that holding things tightly was how you kept them. The kitchen went very quiet. What moved through Sloane in that moment wasn't anger and wasn't gratitude. It occupied the difficult, honest territory between them where most true things actually live, the place she'd been avoiding because entering it meant she couldn't pretend she didn't know what was happening. That wasn't your decision, she said. Quieter now. No, he said. It wasn't. But you made it anyway. Yes. She breathed. She reached into her pocket. She had put the pendant there that morning. Not wearing it. Carrying it. She had told herself the difference mattered and she was still deciding if that was wisdom or semantics. She set the map box on the table between them. Opened it. The crest caught the kitchen light. Dark metal, clean lines, the design of something built to outlast the person who commissioned it. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at him. "I'm not yours," she said. "No," he agreed. "But I'm not unprotected either." "No." She lifted the pendant from the box. Felt the specific weight of it. Deliberate, considered, the weight of a decision made by someone who understood that symbols either mean everything or nothing and had chosen accordingly. She fastened it around her neck. Not for him. For the woman who had stood at a fountain with her feet leaving the floor and had not screamed and had survived and deserved to move through the world as something other than a target. Vane's phone buzzed on the table. Business. The city calling. Something requiring his particular skill set and moral complexity. He didn't look at it. He looked at her. And for the first time since Highland Plaza, Sloane let someone look at her without calculating the threat in it. Outside, the city ran its late-night frequency, 14 floors of distance between her past and whatever this was, and for the length of one quiet moment, neither of them moved to interrupt it. 3 weeks after the pendant, Sloane made a mistake. Not a catastrophic one. Not the kind that announces itself with sirens and breaking glass. The quiet kind. The kind that wears the face of normalcy and only reveals itself as a mistake in retrospect, when you're sitting in the damage of it trying to trace the exact moment the ground shifted. She stopped checking the rearview mirror every 11 seconds. She noticed it on a Tuesday morning, halfway to work, Maya already dropped at school. She had driven 6 full minutes without once looking at the mirror, and the realization hit her not with relief but with a cold, clarifying alarm. Because the mirror wasn't a nervous habit. The mirror was a system. And systems kept her alive. And she had let one dissolve because she felt safe, and feeling safe and being safe were 2 entirely different countries that happened to share a border. She checked the mirror. Nothing there. She checked it again. Nothing there either. She drove the rest of the way to Meridian Avenue with both hands on the wheel and the specific focus of someone who has just been reminded that comfort is not a reward. It's a vulnerability wearing a reward's clothing. The thing she hadn't told Kendra, hadn't told anyone, was that she and Vane had been having dinner twice a week for 3 weeks. Not dates. She refused the word date with the same energy she refused anything that required her to reorganize what she understood about her own situation. They were meals. At her apartment. Sometimes he brought food and sometimes she cooked, and Maya was always present for the first hour and asleep by the second, and in the space that followed, dishes cleared, city humming outside the 14th floor windows, they talked. Not about the Thorne family. Not about the docks or the firm or the deliberately vague men in the building corridors. About other things. She learned that he had grown up between Seoul and Palermo, shuttled between a grandmother who fed him persistence and a grandfather who fed him chess and a father who fed him nothing useful but excellent taste in architecture. She learned that he had been building things since he was 12. Not all of them legal, not all of them things he was willing to name, but things nonetheless, because the alternative was inheriting someone else's version of the world and finding it insufficient. He learned that she had wanted to be a nurse before Maya, before Marcus, before the years that had narrowed her ambitions down to survival and staying solvent. He learned that she still had the textbooks. Boxed, in the second bedroom closet. She hadn't been able to give them away because giving them away felt like a confession she wasn't ready to make. "Why haven't you gone back?" he asked one evening. "Because nursing school costs money and time, and I have neither." He looked at her with the particular attention he gave everything. Complete, architectural, already 3 moves ahead. She saw it before he said it. "Don't," she said. "I haven't said anything. You're about to offer to pay for it. I was going to say the firm's foundation has an education grant for employees." He held her gaze. "It's not charity. It's a benefit. Obina's coordinator used it last year for his MBA." She sat with that. "You looked into it before tonight," she said. "Yes." "How long ago?" A pause that was its own answer. "Vane." 3 weeks ago," he said. "The day you restructured the billing queue. Obina sent me a note. I looked at your file." He straightened his cuff, that gesture, Always that gesture. You're wasted in records coordination. She should have been irritated. She catalogued the irritation, acknowledged it, and then set it down next to the truth that was sitting beside it, that nobody had looked at her professional capability in 4 years. That Marcus had spent 4 years making her feel lucky to be employed at all. That this man had looked at a billing queue restructure and thought she's wasted here and then gone quietly looking for a solution without announcing it as a gift. I'll think about it, she said. Which was the most she'd conceded to anything in years, and they both knew it. The mistake about the rearview mirror announced its consequences 4 days later. Kendra called at 11:43 a.m. on a Friday. Sloane was at her desk running a compliance audit and almost didn't answer because Kendra never called during work hours unless something had already gone wrong, and sometimes Sloane needed 60 more seconds of not knowing. She answered. "There's a woman," Kendra said. No preamble. "She's been to the transit office twice this week asking questions about camera feeds near Halverson Tower. She's not law enforcement. I ran her ID. Her name is Petra Vane." The name landed like a key turning in a lock Sloane hadn't known was there. Vane. His sister, Kendra said. Younger. Based in Palermo from what I can find. She arrived in the city 8 days ago. A pause waited with everything Kendra wasn't saying yet. "She's not here for a visit, Sloane. Women like that don't fly from Palermo to look at transit camera feeds near their brothers." Kendra stopped. Chose her next word carefully. "Near their brother's arrangement. I'm not his arrangement. I know what you are and what you're not. That's not the point." Kendra's voice dropped. "The point is she came here looking. Which means someone sent her. Which means someone in Vane's network, his actual network, the one that doesn't have a Meridian Avenue address and a medical wing, has a concern about you specifically." Sloane sat very still at her desk. What kind of concern? The kind that sends family members to investigate before they send other people. Kendra let that sit for exactly the right amount of time. "I've been trying to tell you, baby. The pendant isn't just protection. It's also a flag. And flags attract attention from both directions." Sloane looked at her desk. At the compliance audit open on her screen. At the ordinary professional surface of a life she had been carefully, methodically constructing for 6 weeks. She thought about the rearview mirror. She thought about what she'd let dissolve. "Where is she now?" Sloane asked. "I don't know. That's the problem." She didn't go to Vane immediately. She thought about it, ran the geometry of it, the way she'd learned to run the geometry of everything since Highland Plaza, and decided that going to him immediately would tell him something about where she was that she wasn't ready for him to know yet. That she was scared. That the pendant meant more to her than she'd admitted. That she had stopped checking the mirror. Instead she picked up Maya from school herself, an hour early, and took her to the park 3 blocks from Halverson Tower, the one with the blue climbing structure and the grandmother who fed pigeons every afternoon at 3 p.m. and whose reliable presence Sloane had catalogued in the first week as a landmark of normalcy. Maya climbed. Sloane sat on the bench and watched her daughter and watched the park entrance and watched the street beyond it and felt the familiar recalibration happening in her chest, the one that tightened everything back down to its operational state, the one that reminded her that her system existed for a reason and reasons don't expire just because you've been having dinner twice a week with a man who quotes chess strategy to a 7-year-old. She was still watching the entrance when she became aware of a woman sitting on the bench at the opposite end of the park. She had been there when Sloane arrived. Sloane had catalogued her then, mid-30s, dark coat, still, and filed her as background. Ordinary. She looked again now. The woman was watching Maya. Not the way adults absently watch children at a park. With direction. With the specific quality of attention that has an object. Sloane stood. The woman looked at her. Dark eyes. Strong jaw. A face that shared its structural vocabulary with someone Sloane had been studying for 6 weeks without meaning to. Petra Vane looked at Sloane the way someone looks at a thing they've been sent to evaluate. Taking inventory, running calculations, arriving at provisional conclusions. Then she stood, buttoned her coat, and walked out of the park without a word. No threat. No approach. No scene. Just the fact of having been there. Having been seen. Having looked at Maya with directed attention and then left. Which was somehow worse than any of the alternatives, because it meant the looking had been enough. Whatever she'd come to confirm, she'd confirmed it. Sloane's hand was in her pocket around her phone before Petra reached the gate. She called Vane. He answered on the first ring. Your sister was just in the park with my daughter, Sloane said. Her voice came out low and level and carrying the specific frequency of a woman who has spent 4 years learning to contain things that deserve to be screamed. The silence on his end lasted 2 seconds. 2 seconds was a long time for Vincenzo Vane. Stay in the park, he said. I'm coming. He arrived in 11 minutes. Not because Halverson Tower was close. It wasn't, not at that hour, not in that traffic. 11 minutes meant he had already been moving before she called. Which meant he had known about Petra before Sloane had. Which meant he had made another calculation without telling her. She was standing at the park entrance with Maya's hand in hers when his car pulled up. Dark, low, the kind of vehicle that doesn't announce itself. And he stepped out still buttoning his jacket, and for once in 6 weeks of careful observation she could read his face clearly. He was not calm. The architecture was there. The controlled surface, the measured movement, but underneath it something was running hot. Something that looked, from a distance, like the specific anger of a man who has had a plan interrupted by someone who should have known better. He looked at Maya first. Then Sloane. Then the park behind her. She's gone, Sloane said. He nodded once. Looked at Maya. Are you all right? Maya, who had not been told anything was wrong and had been eating crackers on the climbing structure while the adult world reorganized itself around her, looked at him with frank 7-year-old assessment. I got to the top, she said. Something moved across his face. The heat underneath the architecture, briefly, became something else. Good, he said. He looked at Sloane. Car. Now. Maya fell asleep on the back seat inside 4 minutes. The way children fall asleep when they have been active and fed and have no reason to believe the world is doing anything other than continuing in its ordinary way. Her cheek against the window. New shoes on her feet. Sloane turned in the passenger seat to face Vane. How long have you known she was here? 6 days. The number landed like a flat stone on still water. 6 days. Yes. And you calculated that I didn't need to know. He kept his eyes on the road. I calculated that knowing would have changed how you moved. How you looked. And Petra reads people. It's what she's good at. I needed her to see you naturally. You used me as a variable in your assessment. He was quiet. Vane. Yes, he said. I did. And I was wrong. 2 conversations in 2 weeks where he told her she was right and he was wrong. She had no framework for a man who admitted error without using the admission as a lever for something else. Marcus had apologized constantly. The apologies were always architecture, load-bearing structures that held up his next decision. Vane's acknowledgements were flat. They didn't lead anywhere except to the next true thing. Who sent her? Sloane asked. A pause. My father. She hadn't expected that. Your father. He runs the Palermo operation. He has done for 30 years. Vane's hands on the wheel were steady. Everything about him was steady in the way that things are steady when they are being held steady by force of will rather than by the absence of pressure. When I designated you, I made a decision that affected his interests. He sent Petra to evaluate whether the decision was, he paused. Selected the word with care. Compromised. Compromised meaning what? Meaning whether I'd made it with my head or with something else. The car was very quiet except for Maya's small, even breathing from the back seat. Sloane looked at the city moving past the window. The ordinary Friday evening of it. People leaving work, lights coming on in apartment buildings, the mundane continuous business of a city that held its violence in specific pockets and kept the rest running smoothly enough that you could almost forget the pockets existed. What did she find? Sloane asked. I don't know yet. What do you think she found? He looked at her then. Briefly. The road requiring his eyes back almost immediately, but for that 1 second she had the full weight of his attention, and what she saw in it was not the calculation and not the calm but the thing underneath both of those. The thing she had been catching glimpses of for weeks in chess games and kitchen tables, and the specific way he looked at Maya when Maya wasn't looking back. The truth, he said. Sloane turned back to the window. The truth. Said the way men say things when they have decided to stop managing the distance between what they know and what they're willing to name. She sat with it. She didn't run from it or toward it. She sat in it the way she'd learned to sit in difficult things. Squarely, without flinching, letting it be exactly as large as it actually was. Your father, she said. Is he a problem? He's always been a problem. A beat. He's my problem. Not yours. If he sent your sister to look at my daughter in a park, Sloane said, he is already mine. Vane said nothing. Which was its own answer. He came inside. Not invited exactly. Not refused either, which in the geometry of their particular arrangement occupied a specific territory she had stopped pretending she didn't understand. Maya woke up enough to navigate to her bedroom, hugged Boots, and was asleep again in minutes. Sloane stood in the kitchen and listened to the apartment settle around her. The biometric lock, the reinforced frame, 14 floors of distance, and felt all of it differently than she had 3 weeks ago. Not unsafe. Not threatened. Just aware, with a clarity that had the clean cold quality of something long suspected finally confirmed, that there was no such thing as a clean perimeter. That safety was not a destination you arrived at and unpacked. It was a negotiation. Continuous. Costly. Conducted in the dark with incomplete information by people who were all, in their various ways, trying to protect something they couldn't afford to lose. Vane was standing at the kitchen window. She looked at his back. At the city reflected in the glass beyond him. Lights and distance and the organized complexity of a place that ran on systems she'd never fully see. Tell me about your father, she said. He turned. Now. Yes. Now. She sat at the table. All of it. The parts you've been calculating whether to tell me. Those parts specifically. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down across from her and told her. It took 40 minutes. She didn't interrupt. She let it arrive the way she'd learned to let difficult information arrive, absorbing it without bracing against it, cataloging without editorializing, filing it all under the category labeled things that are true about the world I am currently inside. What it amounted to was this. Vincenzo Vane had spent 15 years building a version of his father's world that ran on different principles. Not clean, he had never claimed clean. But different. Controlled in specific ways that his father found unnecessarily restrained and his associates found unusually principled, and that Sloane, listening, found, despite every instinct that told her to hold the evaluation at arm's length, quietly, undeniably coherent. His father believed the designation was a liability. That Sloane was a thread that led somewhere exploitable. That attachments in their world were handled privately and briefly and never, under any circumstances, allowed to develop mass and gravity of their own. Vane had disagreed. His father had sent Petra to measure the disagreement. And now? Sloane asked, when he finished. Now Petra reports back. He looked at his hands on the table. And my father decides whether to accept the situation or apply pressure. What kind of pressure? He met her eyes. The kind that would make staying here complicated for you. Sloane absorbed that. She thought about the map box. The pendant at her throat. The nursing school textbooks in the second bedroom closet, boxed and waiting for a version of her life that had kept getting postponed. She thought about a fountain. Pink lemonade. Her feet leaving the floor. She thought about Maya at the top of the climbing structure, crackers in hand, unbothered, unaware, safe. And she thought about what safe had cost and was still costing and would continue to cost, and whether the cost was the kind you paid once or the kind that compounded. I'm not leaving, she said. He looked at her. Sloane. I'm not leaving, she said again. Quieter. More final. The way she said things when they stopped being decisions and became simply true. Not because of your father. Not because of Petra. Not because the situation is complicated. She held his gaze. I've been living in a complicated situation since Maya was 3 years old. Complicated is not new information. Something moved through him. She watched it happen, watched the controlled surface admit something, briefly, that it didn't usually admit. This is different, he said. My father is not Marcus Thorne. No, she agreed. He's a different kind of problem. And you are going to handle him. She said it the way he said things. Flat, factual, without room for negotiation. Because that is your problem, Vane. And I have enough of my own. He stared at her. And for the first time since a fountain in a mall concourse, the balance of something between them shifted. Not toward him, not toward her, but into the specific place where two people stop orbiting each other and occupy the same ground. Yes, he said. Simply. The way he said everything that mattered. Outside the window, the city ran its Friday night. 14 floors below, the street held its ordinary and extraordinary dangers, none of which could reach her here. She reached across the table. Not for his hand. Not dramatically. She touched the edge of his sleeve, that sleeve, always precisely squared. Once, briefly, the way you touch something to confirm it's real. Then she stood and cleared the cups from the table because there were still ordinary things to do, and ordinary things had kept her alive longer than extraordinary ones. He watched her. His phone buzzed. Business. The city. His father's world calling. He looked at it this time. Then he set it face down on the table. And stayed. 6 months later, Sloane Adeyemi walked into her first nursing school lecture 40 minutes early. Not because she was nervous. Because she had a system. She chose the seat with the clearest sightline to the door, closest to the second exit, with her back to the wall and her bag on the chair beside her and her phone face up on the desk. She sat down and opened her notebook, a new one, spiral-bound, the first page blank and waiting, and she breathed. In the 6 months between Petra Vane's appearance in the park and this particular Tuesday morning, the following things had happened. Vane had gone to Palermo. He had been gone 11 days. He had called every evening at 9 p.m. Not long calls, not warm calls exactly, but consistent ones, the kind that said I'm still here without requiring the words. On the 4th day he had called at 9 p.m. and Maya had answered before Sloane reached the phone and spent 12 minutes telling him about a science project involving vinegar and baking soda. And when Sloane finally got the phone, his voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before. Something loosened, something that had briefly stopped doing the work of containing itself. He had come back on the 12th day. He hadn't told her what happened in Palermo. Not in detail. What he told her was, it's handled. What she understood from his face when he said it was that handled had cost something, that the cost had been paid in the currency of a man severing a specific kind of obligation to a specific kind of world, and that he had done it without asking her whether it was worth it because he had already decided it was. She had looked at him for a long time when he said that. Then she had told him about the nursing school application she'd submitted the week he left. He had looked at her the way he looked at things he hadn't seen coming, with a brief recalibration of a man whose intelligence is very good at anticipating everything except the moments when people exceed his expectations. When did you submit it? He asked. The day after you left, she said. Not after I offered the grant. No. Why not then? She had thought about how to answer that. Had turned it over, looking for the honest version, the one that didn't perform either independence or gratitude but simply told the truth. Because I needed to know I was doing it for me, she said. Not because you made it possible. Not because the situation made it logical. Because I decided it was time. She paused. The grant made it possible. But I had to make it mine first. He had been quiet for a long moment. I understand that, he said. And she believed him. Which was the part that kept surprising her. Not that he said the right things, but that when he said them she could find no evidence of architecture underneath. No load-bearing falseness. Just a man saying what he meant and meaning what he said and being against all of Kendra's warnings and her own hard-earned suspicion, actually that Darnell Thorne had been arrested 6 weeks after Palermo. Not by Vane. By Detective Reyes, who had apparently been building a case for 4 months with the careful patience of a man who had been handed information he couldn't use directly but could use as a compass. The fraud investigation connected to Darnell's warehouse property had expanded. 3 additional complaints, the ones that had been quietly buried, had been unburied by a prosecutor whose name Sloane didn't recognize but whose sudden interest in the case she did not think was accidental. She had not asked Vane about it. He had not volunteered. Some things existed in the gray space between them, and they had both, independently and then together, decided that the gray space was not a problem to be solved but a territory to be navigated with honesty and without pretending the gray was white. Kendra had said, when Sloane told her about Darnell's arrest over the phone, both of them quiet for a moment with the specific weight of it, "I still don't entirely trust him." "I know," Sloane had said. "But I trust you," Kendra said. "And I trust that you're watching." "I'm always watching." "I know you are." A pause. "Are you happy?" Sloane had stood at the 14th floor window with the city spread below her and Maya's laughter coming from the living room where Vane was losing, deliberately, precisely, educationally, his 14th consecutive chess game to a child who had started keeping score in a notebook. "I'm building something," Sloane said. "I think that's better than happy." Kendra had been quiet for a moment. "Yeah," she said. "I think it might be." The nursing lecture began. The professor, a compact, direct woman named Dr. Fenella Abubakar, who had the energy of someone who had been unimpressed by excuses for 30 years and found the condition restful, walked in exactly on time and wrote 3 words on the board without introduction. Observe. Assess. Act. Sloane looked at the 3 words. She thought about a mall concourse and a jazz quartet and a man's hand at her throat and a child holding a cup with both hands because she had learned that holding things tightly was how you kept them. She thought about paper orders and reinforced door frames and the difference between them and why the difference mattered and why it wasn't enough on its own and why nothing was ever enough on its own. She thought about gray spaces and honest men and the specific kind of strength that isn't the absence of fear but the decision to keep moving through it. She opened her notebook to the first blank page. She wrote the 3 words down. Then she turned to a fresh line and started writing notes, in her precise medical billing handwriting, that belonged to no system anyone had built for her. Across the city, in Halverson Tower, Maya was at school. The apartment was quiet in the specific way that apartments are quiet when they have been filled with people and then briefly emptied. Not empty exactly, but resting. Holding the shape of the lives inside it. On the kitchen table, a chessboard sat mid-game. Maya had insisted it stay set up between sessions, the pieces holding their positions, the game paused but not abandoned. In the living room, on the couch, Vane sat with a phone against his ear running through the morning's business. The docs, the firm, the deliberately vague men with the deliberately vague job descriptions, the vast organized complexity of a world that ran on systems he had spent 15 years trying to make run differently. He talked. He listened. He made decisions. At 9:14 he paused mid-sentence, looked at the chessboard, and saw that Maya had moved a piece before she left for school. A knight. Advanced position. Setting up something 3 moves ahead that she hadn't shown him she understood yet. He looked at it for a long moment. "I'll call you back," he said and hung up. He crossed to the table and sat down and looked at the board with the full architectural attention he brought to everything, and found that he was not calculating a counter move. He was just looking. At a game that was ongoing. At pieces that held their positions between sessions. At a 7-year-old's opening gambit executed with a patience that exceeded her years. He thought about a woman in a lecture hall across the city, 3 words in a notebook, a blank page that was no longer blank. He thought about what it cost to build something instead of just protecting it. He thought about Palermo. About what he'd said to his father in a room that smelled like his childhood and disappointment, and the specific staleness of a man who had confused control with love for so long, he could no longer locate the distinction. He had said, "I am done building your version of this world." His father had looked at him with the expression of a man watching something he'd constructed for 30 years choose its own direction. He had not tried to stop it. which was either acceptance or strategy, and Vane had decided on the flight home that he would treat it as acceptance and respond accordingly and correct the interpretation later if it proved wrong. This was, he had come to understand from a woman who had survived 4 years of the opposite, how you built trust. Not by assuming the best. By deciding to act as though the best were possible and remaining clear-eyed about the evidence. He moved a bishop, countering Maya's knight. Not to win, never to win, not against her, not yet, but to advance the situation. To create a position where her next decision would require her to think in a way she hadn't thought before. This was, he had decided, the work. Not the docks. Not the deliberately vague men. Not the city and its organized complexity and the gray spaces where things got handled that couldn't be handled in the light. This. A chessboard. A paused game. A child learning to think ahead. A woman in a lecture hall writing her own notes on a blank page. This was what he had gone to Palermo to protect. His phone buzzed on the table. The city. Again. Business. Again. The world he lived in and would always live in, pressing through. He looked at it. He looked at the chessboard. He answered the phone. Because this was not a fairy tale and he was not a clean man and the work was not finished and would not be finished, and that was the truth. The whole complicated, unglamorous, honest truth of a life lived in gray spaces trying to make them run differently. But he kept one eye on the night. 3 days later, Sloane came home from her second lecture and found Maya in the living room. Chessboard in front of her, playing against herself. She had moved both sides 14 times. Who's winning? Sloane asked, dropping her bag. Maya considered this with great seriousness. I am, she said. Both of me. Sloane looked at her daughter, this specific, serious, elephant naming, crayon drawing, cracker-eating child who had stood at a fountain holding a cup with both hands and had not broken, had not shattered, had held, and felt something in her chest that was not relief and not joy exactly, but something older and quieter than both. Survival with its eyes open. She sat on the floor beside the chessboard. Show me, she said. Maya showed her. And outside, the city continued its business, organized, complex, gray in specific places and luminous in others. And the cycle of fear that had run through this family for 4 years had not ended, exactly, because cycles don't end, they transform. But it had been interrupted. Decisively. Expensively. By a woman who had stopped screaming and started watching and eventually started building. By a man who had looked up from his coffee in a mall concourse and made a calculation that cost him more than he'd budgeted. By a child who played both sides of the board and called it winning. The pendant caught the late afternoon light at Sloane's throat. Dark metal. Clean lines. Not a cage, not a crown, but a coordinate. A marker in the city that said this woman is not alone, and meant it in every complicated gray honest way that mattered. She touched it once. Then she turned back to the board. If this hit you, if you watched this to the end and felt something shift, then you already know what to do. Like this video. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next. And drop one word in the comments. Just one. The word this story left you with. I read every single one. Every single one.